Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Suzanne Cohen. I'm the Managing Artistic Director of Mirror Stage. I forgot to bring my name tag because it is at home from last night, but I want to thank you all for joining us for today's Activism Brunch. It is the first Activism Brunch that we have done live and in person since 2019. So we appreciate everyone's patience in us getting started a little bit late. We're excited to have S. Charushila joining us from UW-Bothel's School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences. We'll also be presenting 2 teaser scenes from our upcoming Expand Upon Income Inequality performances that are coming up in October, with 2 newly commissioned plays by Nell Tankis and Mary E. Brown. We would like to start, I guess I can, it's not as smoky in here. We'd like to start by wiping the sweat off my face. And we would like to start by acknowledging that we live, work, and play on unceded territory. We honor with gratitude the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish and Coast Salish tribes, as well as their centuries of stewardship and care for the land itself. Indigenous communities are very much still here, and this acknowledgement serves as a first step in honoring the traditional lands we occupy and as an act of resistance against the erasure of their histories. We would also like to thank For Culture, Arts Fund, Arts Washington, the City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, the EPS Fund, Humanities Washington, the National Endowment of the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Phinney Neighborhood Association, and the Posner-Wallace Foundation for the support in making Contexpo possible. We also would like to thank Mighty O Donuts for the coffee and the donuts. They're awesome. They're around Seattle. They have many locations, and so please support Mighty O Donuts. If you'd like to help support this program, you can make a donation to Mirror Stage on the Mirror Stage website at mirrorstage.org/donate. Or we're trying to grab one of our QR code signs that has QR codes on it that you can either scan that to make a donation or to sign up for the email list or to volunteer. You can also check in with Kylie Riffle, our marketing and PR manager, who's waving her hands in the back there, and she would be happy to get you sorted for that. So Mirror Stage's mission is to use the power of storytelling to challenge assumptions, bias, and prejudice, increasing equity and inclusion, while encouraging more thoughtful reflection on today's issues. Contexpo is a series of events featuring community artists, including visual art, spoken word, special speakers, and workshop components, taking a deeper dive into themes related to our upcoming productions. And the theme we're exploring this weekend is income inequality and the wage gap. Professor Charushila earned a BA in economics with honors from the University of Delhi and a PhD in economics from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her research work focuses on questions of economic subjectivity, gender, development, identity, and post-coloniality globalization. She was editor of Rethinking Marxism from August 2009 to July 2013, and served as an active member of its editorial board for more than a decade. Dr. Charushila completed 2 terms as an elected member of the governing board of the Cultural Studies Association in May 2015. She twice served as an elected board member for the International Association for Feminist Economics and acted as the co-convener for the Feminist Pre-Conference at the South Asian Conference in Madison, Wisconsin from 2005 to 2009. Charu was also one of my first cultural studies professors at UW-Bothell, and I'm so pleased to have her joining us today. So, thank you, Charu.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's really nice to come here now, no longer as a student, but as a peer and colleague, to talk to you here. Thank you for inviting me.
So we're going to have a discussion about some of the common misconceptions about income inequality and the wage gap and where those problems stem from and what kind of solutions there. Then we'll do a teaser scene from Deep Veins by Nell Tankis. Then we will have a question and answer period, and then we'll do a second teaser scene from The Epic Differential by Mary E. Brown. So, sure, with all the work that you have been doing around town and around the country and internationally, what is your sense of the important things that we need to know about income inequality in 5 words or less?
Well, not quite 5 words,
Yeah.
but here are a few very important things. Historically, it had been assumed that the underlying sources of poverty were due to either overpopulation. That was one thing, that people have too many children and that's why they're poor. This is what is often thought about in terms of the third world. Or that it is because of a lack of growth, that you could sort of address the questions of inequality and poverty by, in a very crude sense, increasing the size of the pie. That if you had a bigger pie, there would be more to go around. In hindsight, 3 things stand out. Very clearly, we have come to realize what we somehow always knew during the Great Depression, but somehow forgot in the post-World War II era and subsequently, which is that there has been a tremendous amount of growth. We now know, in a way that we did not fully realize, that if you try and grow your way out of a sort of poverty, you're essentially assuming that poverty is a shared condition, that we are all poor and we all grow together, and that growth essentially, since the Industrial Revolution at least, has been a fossil fuel-based process. So what has been happening is that in ecological terms, we have been destroying the basis for any future ability to grow out of our problems because of the ecological crisis. So just longer term, the idea that growth can solve issues doesn't work. Second, it's very clear that productivity, that is, workers' productivity has been growing, wages have not in pace. So the underlying idea that markets would solve the problem by increasing worker productivity turns out to just be wrong. There's also been a tendency, and I will add this is my own work, to blame foreigners. Another word for this is globalization. It's all the fault of those Chinese, of those Indians, of other people. And the underlying problem is, first, there's something called colonial history. Second, the underlying issue is that the jobs that went abroad are not the same jobs that were here at the height of post-World War II prosperity. So when people talk about bringing the jobs back, they talk as if the jobs you had in the 1950s with 1950s wages would come back. But technology doesn't work that way. So if you're talking about bringing the jobs back, you're essentially talking about bringing jobs that are part of the sort of deindustrial technological change, which are low-wage jobs of subcontract. You are not talking about returning to the era of prosperity. So instead of therefore thinking about blaming foreigners, growing your way out of the problem, or blaming the poor for their own poverty because they lack education or they're overpopulating, if all it took was education, then, some countries in Latin America, India, we would have been some of the richest people in the world. I mean, we have some pretty strong educational resources. What you really need, in addition to redistribution, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. That is, you need to really start addressing the idea that the underlying problem is that what we need now to do is to rethink how we share our resources and support each other. At the end of the day, without that, there is no long-term solution. So that's the first part. The second part is that we tend to think of redistribution as tax and spend. We depend on the state to do that, and that is one very important way to do it with healthcare, infrastructure building, mass education. But tax and spend essentially is redistribution because it comes after the fact. A better way to do it is what we sometimes call pre-distribution, or before the fact, which is you get your cut of production in advance. This is called wages, when you are paid at the moment of production. as opposed to getting paid through a redistribution indirectly. So longer term, in addition to state infrastructure provision, I think there is really very little long-term solution unless we actually address wage rates, sort of better questions of length of the working day and benefits, for which you do need unionization and you need very strong labor rights. So I'll stop there.
So what about the idea that some people have proposed about a universal income? So instead of wages being paid at the moment of production, but to provide a basic income for everyone, what are the pros and cons of that kind of approach?
Universal basic income, I think, is a very good solution. One of the most difficult elements of a universal basic income is that to the extent that you depend on the state to provide it, you're going to need a tremendous amount of political will, which means you need to have politicians who are not bought off by people who are unwilling to pay their fair share of resources by paying taxes. I will say the market works. You buy your politician, they stay bought. But outside of that, it is probably not a good idea for us to do this without fully thinking through whether we are willing to engage in the political struggles that are needed for that. The second piece of it is I am a globalist. Universal basic incomes have this very interesting problem, like a lot of social welfare states do. Nation states tend to be much better at caring for their own citizens, but they often do so by getting very, very angry at the idea that foreigners are going to show up and benefit. So you can see that many of the really strong social welfare states in Europe are also highly anti-immigrant. So I do think if we want universal basic incomes, we do want to supplement that or complement that with some very serious kind of infrastructure building through ecology and through really richer countries bearing their fair share of resource redistribution at the global level. So that is what I would say.
Okay. Well, so can you help us understand a little bit better where so with the post-World War II economic boom and everybody, oh, these were the good old days, and everybody's comfortable and everybody's got the house with the white picket fence and the affordable education and everything. And so when did the gap of income inequality really become more apparent, or is that even earlier than that? Can you help trace
Well,
sort of the...
it's very clear that the post-World War II boom was not a universal boom. I just want to be very clear about that. Not everybody was able to access the resources that came in the post-World War II boom. So we want to be quite honest about the racial compact that lies behind the post-World War II accord. And secondly, that a lot of it was really built on military Keynesianism. And so it was essentially, if you want to think about, instead of markets, you want to think about government, it was one of the biggest government-sponsored spending programs through military and through housing subsidies. And also very, very strong wage sort of alignment between wages and productivity growth. So it's the 70s really that this starts to fall apart. And then by the 80s, with Reagan tax cuts, you really compound what was already building, which is what the Reagan tax cuts did is it basically put the nail into the coffin of what was already happening with technological change and with sort of oil crises, inflation. We are finally seeing inflation come back. It's going to be really interesting to see what that means for us. But yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
So
and the third world. So just remember, the counterpart to the Reagan tax cuts was also the third world debt crisis. So this was a global problem.
Right.
The neoliberal experiment took place across the third world, just as the Cold War was fought across the third world. So yeah.
So part of it then is related to, as you were saying, like the shift in industry, that it was more manufacturing in the early to mid 20th century, that there was investment in infrastructure, that's a big part of what helped pull us out of the Great Depression. But so the wages were tied to what the prevailing market economy was more manufacturing based here in the United States, certainly. And that then as technology began growing in popularity, I don't want to say popularity, but taking a bigger share, and that, so part of, sorry, I have like a bunch of different thoughts about that, but so part of it is that jobs, it was cheaper to exploit labor overseas so they could, lower wages could be paid to keep costs down for products. And so that's where you were talking about some of the jobs that, if foreigners are coming in and taking the jobs, it's like, well, those jobs weren't here to begin with.
The kind of jobs that were sent abroad were not the jobs that were here. This is what you have to remember, that the reason the jobs could move abroad was the technology changed the nature of the job, right? And so when we talk about the jobs going abroad, it's the technical change that comes first. And the reason you can pay them less is because technical change de-skills high-skilled jobs. Because if you have a high-skilled job, you cannot afford to have too much labor turnover, right? And even now, if you think about what gets subcontracted, it really is not, I mean, you can't really subcontract your dental services,
Right.
right? You cannot subcontract restaurant work, right? There's a lot of things in the service industry and other things where you do actually need people there. The other thing I'd like to note is that the period of high wages wasn't just backed by taxes. It was backed by very, very strong unions, very strong labor rights. There's a kind of nostalgia for the state, which I'm always perplexed by. People always talk about the social welfare state. And, when I'm from India, and people will very often talk about neoliberalism. The state no longer supports us, and I'm looking around and saying, where? When did this state supposedly support us? And particularly when it comes to gendered labor, childcare, questions of healthcare, social reproduction, that has never had strong state support. So to the extent we talk about infrastructure, we're really talking again about infrastructure that supported industry. And even in education, there is a reason that this country has schools of engineering, but not schools of labor. Schools of business, but not schools of labor. Just think about it, entire schools devoted to training people at government expense. Talk about the biggest subsidy to industry. It's all those engineering departments.
Right.
But you don't have agricultural schools, whereas at one point land-grant universities took that very seriously.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But so with Reagan and trickle-down economics combined with defunding of public education, and so creating a bigger gap in terms of training the workforce, so people were being trained for specific jobs or not, or what they were being educated towards, and who could access education. So that, again, the way the ladder was, again, not created, but presented, that, okay, well, you need to get an education to be able to climb your way up out of poverty, and if you aren't, it's because of your own personal failure. It's not because you don't have access to a breakfast program to have enough food, or that you can't afford tuition, or that all the other reasons that it becomes, the individualist personal failure rather than how wealth is being hoarded, and things like the trickle-down theory were such a lie.
Ideologically successful, right? I mean, that is the nature of ideology. It is to convince people. There is always a kernel of truth to ideology. If it was straight lies, it wouldn't work. So it is obviously true that if you're given opportunities, you need some effort. But people talk as if poor make no effort. I'd like to see anybody who talks about poverty actually work as a farm worker 12 hours and then talk about who's actually doing effort, right? So there is some really serious underlying.
Right, so
Yeah.
the values, the moral values that are assigned to particular jobs or what counts as effort. So again, like childcare, that is not considered work and that is not considered worthy of support, or how that might hold people back from participating in the work world more. But so how a lot of the Reagan era policy changes that people initially thought were terrific, and now we're reaping the bad corn that was sowed. And so, like, do you want to say anything about today's activity around student debt and erasing student debt, and how that plays a part in income inequality?
So we are definitely, so just going back to the question of wages and income inequality, a lot of people, it's really worth actually reading John Maynard Keynes. I'm not a Keynesian in much of my work, but it is worth reading the general theory and to realize that when Bretton Woods came, he lost. Because one of the things that Keynes was very clear about is that there is a social compact which the wage reflects. And in his Am I a Liberal? He was asked, are you a liberal? This is, of course, now in the British sense of the word, not in the US sense of the word. So liberal there means like not a radical, you know. And he's like, I know my class background. I am elite. I am a liberal. I stand with my class. I'm a member of the elite classes. But I understand that if we do not share the prosperity coming out of the Great Depression, we will have a revolution on our hands. And he believed that wage gaps make sense, but nothing remotely like the percentage of gaps that we have. Partly because of social compact reasons, but also partly because in a macro sense, people need to earn enough to buy the stuff they're producing. And if there isn't enough, there is a point beyond which you can't really run a serious mass growth program. This is one of the differences between India and China. This China did do with the Communist Revolution for all the questions of democratic suppression. They broke the backs of the landed aristocracy. India never did that, which means that what has happened is India has never been able to generate the mass redistribution of growth that you need in order to have a sustained growth cycle like China does. Now, the environmental consequences of this are horrible, and of course they are doing this in ways that are highly problematic, both for labor rights and human rights. But just from a purely econ perspective, I'm raising this because part of what you're asking about student debt is that we are seeing student debt in the US essentially is partly one of the consequences of a failure to have resource provisioning where your wages are high enough to pay for housing, to pay for education, to pay for a whole bunch of things, right? So the counterpart of student debt is the housing debt and the rental crisis. They are all part and parcel of a similar lack of adequate wages. And there is now a reemergence of a global debt crisis. Sri Lanka definitely had that. It's very clear. People don't think about this very much, but Pakistan's not going to have the resources to handle what is currently a real human rights disaster with flooding. Africa's debt crisis was never actually resolved. So I do think we need a serious global jubilee. Student debt, but global reapportionment of debt.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Let's take a brief break, and we'll present the first teaser scene, which is from Nell Tankis's Deep Veins. So I'm just going to move the microphones because the actors are going to be up here. Leave it there? Okay.
Scene 4, 2 days from now at Plasma Corps, a plasma donation center. Rena is in the intake office.
Collarbone has finished Rena's intake.
I'm here for the special.
And you're new here.
I've been here before.
Oh, you've been here 3 times in the last couple of weeks. You need to rest.
I waited 7 days between my last donation and this one. That's the recommended amount.
Yes, I suppose you're right. But you look sick.
You haven't even examined me.
We don't do full examinations here. We do intakes. But that doesn't count as a full examination. Come back next week.
The special's over next week.
Try next month. Get another job or something. Get more sleep. Quit doing drugs late at night with your friends, loser. I can see it in your soft eyes. You're in pain. Soft eyes, deep veins. It's your own fault. You need to eat healthier. Get a good night's sleep. Work less. What do?
I'm a cook.
Try getting a job that doesn't have food associated with it. One of those tech jobs, maybe. They don't need any experience. You go there, you hit some buttons, you get a good wage. How long are you at the grill?
A few hours at a time.
You have to take hydration breaks.
I do, every few hours.
You need to hydrate every hour. You could be too hydrated. You should get a job that requires you to hydrate every hour. You need to take care of yourself.
There's probably another plasma place I could go who would listen to me.
You'll need to go through our intake questionnaire again, but you could go. They'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you.
Scene 4, again.
Collarbone has just finished Rena's.
I'm here for the special.
Oh, you're new here.
I've been here before.
Oh, and you took a 7-day break between the week where you donated twice.
Yes.
Well, then we can get your donation ready right away.
Thank you.
What? You're looking a little ill today. Did you sleep?
Yes.
How long?
6 or 7 hours.
Well, you should be getting at least 8.
Not always possible with my job.
Of course, that makes sense. Do you have more than one?
Not now.
See, you're lucky. At least you only have one place to worry about bearing down on you.
Yeah.
Do you live in a calm environment? Let me rephrase that. Is your living situation adequate?
Sometimes I hear my neighbors banging at 3 in the morning, but it's not bad. There used to be a couple, a different one that lived next to me that would scream at each other, throw bottles at each other. But honestly, it's not bad. And we're all close, so I can tell them to stop, and they will.
Oh, good. You deserve rest.
Thank you.
The last time you tried to donate, your veins were very deep, and you appeared to be very uncomfortable. We usually have a policy where if you get stuck, you get paid, but we can't do that every time you come in. Obesity is a leading cause of deep veins. Have you considered losing a few pounds and then returning to donate?
My veins have always been deep. I don't know why.
Tell me more.
That's it.
I want to hear it again.
That's it. There's no other reason. You want me to say there's a reason why my veins are deep, that it's about my bad health, or that there's something wrong with me, that somehow it's my fault or my family's, but they're just deep.
We can give you a 3rd chance, but we'll need to do another intake.
Scene 4, a 3rd time.
Collarbone has just finished Rena's.
I'm here for the special.
You're totally new here.
I've been here before.
Whoa, nar, dude.
I'm here for the special.
Fish and chips is Saturday only, my dude.
The Plasma Corps special.
That only happens once a month.
When I was in line, the whiteboard said if you donated 3 times in a week, the first week of the month, you'd get a $30 bonus.
Everyone is entitled to a little blowy every now and then, I suppose.
Tell me more about that.
It's not within my assigned duties. Might I be able to interest you in a spot of hand sanitizer?
Yes, thank you.
Collarbone offers Raina a small bottle of orange juice. Raina takes it from them.
I love orange juice, thank you.
The special requires you to stock up on your blood metallics, your iodine, your iron levels.
Tell me about your eating habits.
Ass. All I eat is ass. Every day more ass.
Oh, you're healthy then. It's important to have a balanced breakfast. Are you satisfied?
Satisfaction is subjective and matters as much as happiness. It is relative and based upon the status quo.
What time are you off work today?
Whether time is relevant or not is inconsequential. The only constant is the crushing anxiety of another pandemic.
How do you feel about pig lung?
Doesn't matter what I feel about it, but I try to be kosher.
If I come back tomorrow, will it be the same?
Any way you swing it, the shit kicks you the same, duder. The minute differences in my personality are solely for you to deal with the fact that no matter what you do, you can never make enough money. Revolution is the only way. Maybe you could kill me. Come on. I've never wanted to die so hard before.
End of scene.
I'd like to thank Andrew Litsky and Roz Cornejo for their performances in Deep Veins by Nell Tankis. Expand upon, yes, if you can come back, Charu. Expand upon income inequality. There'll be 2 weekends of performances, both of which will be online. The performances are in October, and tickets will be available on the website in the next couple of days. They're not on sale just yet, but we hope that you will join us online for that. Before we turn it over to Q&A, I had another question that I was going to ask, and of course now I was so engaged with the performance that now I forgot. Well, okay, since I can't remember, if we'll open it up for some questions and answers. So I'm gonna unsuccessfully, who wrapped that? Probably me. I'm gonna hand the microphone over to our Associate Artistic Director, Kiki Dominguez, and she will come to you with the microphone if you have a question.
This one doesn't go very far, but I will try.
Oh.
You might have to meet me halfway. Real quick, here we go. Oh. Any questions on this side? Perfect. Hello, Hazel. Here you go. What's your question?
So you mentioned the tech industry makes high-skilled jobs low-skilled. If, assuming we continuing to proceed on a tech industry, like getting better at all of these things, how does, what does that do for the working population? How do we maintain jobs or keep jobs here or maintain wages at a livable rate if we're continuing to grow technically?
So, a good way to think about it is to think about what you're placing inside tech industry, right? So what is often called tech is, if you think of production as like a chain, right? What tech does is that it de-skills the entire bottom range, and you don't call that tech. You call it manufacturing, assembly line, all of those things. And the piece that has to do with organizing the chain, that's a job that's held by a very tiny number of people, and that's what you're calling tech, right? So in terms of how you handle this, I think that first and foremost, absolutely no doubt, minimum wage, living wage projects have to be in place. Absolutely. Secondly, I think that in terms of jobs creation, we need a much larger focus on the kinds of areas and industries within which job creation projects take place. We need education, we need childcare, we need infrastructure building, we need to stop calling it the gig economy. We call it okay, I'm going to say this, gig economy is because informal sector has brown and girl cooties. So when boys end up doing this job, we call it gig. Whereas historically, when it has been done by women in the third world and so on, you called it the informal sector. You know, wash your car, sir, jewelry assembly, driving autos, things like that, right? So what you need is you need to really have a whole series of changes that regularize these kind of subcontract jobs which have been designed essentially to escape labor law. And finally, and this is me, this is the Marxist in me, I do feel that there is still in many of our approaches, I think Kathy Weeks is right, we do still operate on a certain kind of moral precept on the value of labor. I think we are overworked. So in terms of how can we solve things by having more jobs, solve things by having more jobs, solve things by having more jobs, I don't want to solve things by having more jobs. I want some leisure. So I think that having a much healthier understanding of what is a reasonable expectation of labor on the part of people, and just getting rid of this permanent drive to self-improvement or morality. Honestly, you know, so sort of when people say, well, I'll give you an opportunity, but work hard, you know, I actually think, even for my students, I think a lot of what they learn is when they hang out with their friends. It's not necessarily sitting and listening to a lecture. So there is a real way in which we need to rethink some of our solutions. They have to be much more focused on leisure and quality of life than just on labor. And I think that's really why people like universal basic income, is that it does seem to have this premise or promise that there is some value just for having time to yourself and your family and being guaranteed something. The difficulty, as I said, has always been how to fund it. But yeah.
I remembered what I was going to ask before, because I wanted to kind of bring it back locally, and so in terms of like the wage gap and people who are working some of the service level jobs that you were talking about who can't afford to live in Seattle. And so because the cost of living is so high, but there's still the expectation that people will be waiting our tables, that people will be helping us in stores, that people will be stocking the grocery shelves, that people will be cleaning the houses or taking care of our children. And so the commute that people are, that doesn't count as leisure time. And so it's actually extending the workday longer and longer for people, and that gets into other infrastructure issues with public transportation and all of that. But I was hoping you could, so we were talking about some of the global stuff and national stuff, but how are we seeing it here in Seattle presenting?
So very clearly, Seattle has some really deep-rooted problems that are particular to the region. And not particular to Seattle alone, but to the region. One has to do with the kind of complete failure of these urban infrastructure gentrification projects as some kind of solution to questions of urban inequality and poverty. All this sort of culture industries nonsense that used to go around. I mean, this is a culture industry, but I mean that whole sort of idea that if you create these culture tech corridors, people will come and growth will happen and jobs will be there. And a sort of permanent effort to woo the entrepreneur. It's like, you know, the entrepreneur is always waiting stage left, and they're kind of needing to be wooed. Tax break, please show up, please, you know, and they just are like, oh, playing all like hard to get. It's just nonsense, right? So, and you spend your entire city infrastructure trying to woo folks to come in. And in state of Washington, this is compounded by the fact that we have no state income tax. And so that has to be fixed. At the end of the day, one thing I do agree with Milton Friedman, there is no such thing as a free lunch unless it's eaten by billionaires. And so what we need to do is we need to fund this. But secondly, as I talked about wages, it's very clear that service sector is associated historically with female and minority labor and is therefore historically underpaid. And so in terms of solutions, one of the most important things is right now, finally, King County has funded a study, a comparable worth wage gap study for people in our healthcare service industries as healthcare outreach workers, and a shout out to the Western Poverty Center, University of Washington, which actually has taken on this project and is to actually deliver a report on fixing the wage gap for essentially what are state employees, because a lot of healthcare is state sector, especially in this part of the world, and outreach workers are in state sector. So that is one. Two, in the tech industry, there is a tremendous gender gap in wages. It would help to fix it, but since that tends to focus more on the upper end of the wage distribution, I think it's really important that we focus much more broadly on the sort of service sector, service sector, restaurant sector, healthcare sector, outreach workers, that segment. I think that's where the wage gap persistence really has to be addressed if we have to make a difference.
No, I don't have a mic, it's okay. So would you like to say anything about the intersections, the intersectionality within the wage gap and how people tend to think of it as monolithic when it's really not?
Oh, absolutely. I strongly recommend International Association for Feminist Economics. They had a special issue of feminist economics a while ago called Gender, Color, Caste, and Class. And, you know, it sort of made connections between questions of intersectionality in the third world, because just as the first world is not monolith, neither is the third world, and particularly questions of race and gender in the US. So very clearly, there are tremendous set of gaps having to do with wages in the US, both by race and by gender. So there is a wage gap on both those fronts. Also, sexuality. Lee Badgett and the Williams Institute have done tremendous amount of work to dispel this sort of myth of the elite, hyper-rich LGBTQ person who presumably stands in for what people imagine gay rights to look like. That just might have been the public face at a particular moment of the movement, but it's very clear that if you look at lesbian women, for example, there's tremendous inequality. If you look at black lesbian women, it's compounded. So the wage gaps are really substantial. And therefore, you can't address it without that. An additional element is the wealth gap. Because one thing we really underestimate is how much middle-class people and white people inherit, particularly from their parents. And I don't mean that they're inheriting trust funds, but, you know, their parents sell a home. Or when the parents die, you sell your family home, and that becomes your down payment for your own home, right? So the intergenerational wealth gap is tremendous. And we really should not underestimate how much the housing crisis, particularly in this part of the country, essentially wiped out the very few gains members of minority and black population were making in home ownership, which means that they were not able to, you know, have the mortgage or that second loan or that down payment for a home. So I think that you want to look both at the wage gap and at the wealth gap. So.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the audience? Oh. Michael has a question.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about gains in productivity, which over time have sort of led to a higher accumulation of wealth at the top of the economic spectrum. And as we talk about in particular AI making many jobs obsolete. What alternatives are there, other than universal basic income, that maintains a level of income for certain people, as well as how do we, I was really kind of impressed where you talked about more leisure time, because there's sort of a romantic notion of like the artisan putting in all of this time into this thing that they love, and as we talk about people developing technologies that allow fewer people to do more with their time, we don't really talk about what the people whose jobs are being lost are supposed to be doing. And there's this idea, oh, you go out and pursue your passions or something like that. What do you make of that? How do we solve that? Is there a way to solve that?
You do need revolutionary solutions at this point, I do believe, because growing your way out of the problem is no longer sustainable, just ecologically or in terms of social systems. But you don't have to have revolution in that old model of one massive hiccup where you take over the state. It's a sort of very much the romance of, it's a very male romantic vision of the hero with the gun, which is not the way it has to happen. There is a book that I recommend. It's called Take Back the Economy. It is J.K. Gibson Graham. Julie Graham was on my committee, Truth in Advertising. And one of the things they do, which I really like, is that they point out that a lot of our rhetoric of neoliberalism assumes that there are only two institutions at play, state and market. So anything that is not the state, we assume is a neoliberal solution because we assume it's privatizing individual market. What we've forgotten is what we used to know, which is a third institution, which is community. I know that half of my community where I live would not have managed during COVID without mutual aid. I know that there have been historically large volumes of efforts at labor sharing, or childcare is often done in these ways, and we often think it's romantic because we often think it's small. But if you look, for example, at food security globally, when we think of small farmers and this and that, something like 60% of global food security is essentially secured by women's kitchen gardens. So you're not talking, if you put it together either in terms of percentage of production or in terms of percentage of population, it's quite large. So in terms of solutions, I do think that we are going to need to take back multiple institutions. Some of it is going to be market-based, right? But we also need to not focus just on productivity, because Amartya Sen is really good at this. He talks about the fallacy of assuming you can take a production process. And in fact, this is one of his most important contributions in his work on poverty and famines and on sort of addressing hunger and deprivation. He says you cannot really decide how to chop up a production process to decide what proportion of the productivity belongs to which segment of the workers. And the problem is that tech and AI like to assume that all the productivity gains are due to them, as if you can really chop out one piece of the production process and decide that they earned it because of their productivity gain, right? So part of what we need to do is we also need to take back movements, many of which were historically quite large, cooperative movements of worker-owned cooperatives. We need much better food security, urban infrastructure as well as rural infrastructure to provide that. And I think we also do need much, much more devolution of resource control to the local level, because leisure is one thing you cannot really mandate from top high. if it is genuinely leisure, it really is something that happens if you've got resource sharing at the local level in terms of local control of parks, local control of city budgets, local control of community centers, things like that. So to give one example, it took forever for the Magnuson Community Center to finally allow members of Sandpoint Housing, the low-income housing, to sit on the Magnuson Community Center board, which is why it is not surprising a lot more money went into the dog park than it did for the people who actually lived there, right? And so without having that change, you did not have people able to tell the local community board where to put its money, and it meant very simple things, like the kids who lived there were not able to play basketball there because the community center made money by renting out their facilities to a private school. And so that meant people who lived there were not able to go there, and it really took Charlene Lyles' death and all of the real dog whistles about the sort of ex-housed and ex-car, ex-homeless population that is now at Sandpoint Housing, and the sort of accusation of a sort of minority community with kids who are out in the park doing graffiti. And it's like, what do you expect them to do if they can't actually go to their own community center? And so that is the final thing. You do need a lot more local control of really specific leisure time activities. You can't really get that from, that's where universal basic income doesn't fully make it, because it doesn't really, it still is just your wage, but it doesn't really talk about the infrastructure of parks and community centers and that makes the community where you will enjoy your leisure, yeah.
Yeah, so the difference between the individualism outlook and communitarianism, and
Absolutely.
seeing how individuals are part of a larger community.
Yeah, but I do recommend Take Back the Economy. It is divided into 5 chapters. Take back markets, take back property, take back finance, take back labor. You know, it's very nicely organized, and it was written not to be used in college courses, but to be used in union halls, churches, community centers. So it's really worth looking at.
Great. Do we have other questions? Brian, had you raised your hand, or Angie, I know you.
Yeah, I raised my hand, but it was somewhat addressed by, because my question was, and how do you see this working out without a bloody revolution?
Are there other questions? Hazel has a follow-up.
Yeah. What's an example of a country that doesn't have income inequality or a wage gap that you were talking about China, but like obviously some of the politics and the way that those are achieved are not ideal. Is there a country that doesn't have these issues? Can we implement it or take an example from them, or do we have to remove capitalism to
Remove
resolve
capitalism. Yeah, I think that one. Remove capitalism. But again, there is no country that lacks these kinds of issues. What we can learn from is it isn't a 1-0. There are countries that have some of these problems less and some of these problems more. And I think that we have to really pick and choose and think of how to do it. So for example, I think it is clear that if you look at
Like Iceland.
yeah, well, Iceland's harder because not everybody has oil and natural gas offshore to fund their entire state apparatus for a social welfare system. But even just compare Seattle to Vancouver, right? We have very similar geographic region. We are both port cities, both from countries with historically violent takeover of lands, and but there is no doubt that quality of life and infrastructure in Vancouver is a lot better than in Seattle, right? So that's what I mean. It's not that if you were to ask me, Are they equal? Obviously not. But if you were to ask me, have they managed to really ameliorate more of some of the inequality issues compared to the US? The answer is yes, because it makes a difference if you've got a good public healthcare system, or if you've got a government that uses taxes to build a functional, not just build, but build a functional public transportation system, right? Where you can actually go from one part of the city to the other for your job in a reasonable amount of time. That kind of stuff, where you can live like that. So I do think so clearly taxes are important, right? Equally clearly, we need to start rethinking citizenship and the extent to which the single most important basis for rights, even in democratic countries, is birth-based. Because citizenship in the Westphalian Accord is a birth-based right. Never forget. It is who you were born to and where you were born. It is a complete accident of birth that decides which country you are a citizen of. And that means the single most set of rights we give people is based on birth. And this is our concept of a democracy where who you are and who you are born to is irrelevant. So let's just start there by then adding that one of the difficulties we have faced is that countries that do secure better social welfare states have also tended to harden their borders. And so we're going to need to really rethink the extent to which human rights and economic rights have become divorced from each other. So in fact, one of the things that you are not allowed to claim is a violation of your human rights as a political refugee, is the complete sort of economic and ecological collapse of your own resource base as a place to go somewhere. So you're not allowed to use economic refugees as an actual refugee category, right? And so part of what that means is we are going to have to rethink locally how we handle immigrant rights. It's taken very, very long, but finally, farm workers, community to community, big shout out to them, finally, they won a right to have better wages and essentially to challenge the H-2A visa, which is little more than slave labor. Well, not in the classic chattel slavery sense of the word, but in terms of the inability of a worker to really challenge control of very basic elements of their life by their employers. So I think we are going to have to address that. And if we don't, it's going to come back and hit us on the foot, because as long as there is a reserve army of desperate people who are willing to work for less, our own wages will drop. There is no way we can raise our wages if we don't raise other people's wages. So, yeah.
Any other questions that people would like to ask at this point? Take the mic back. Try not to trip Kiki. Let me wrap this back around. Okay, so you mentioned community to community, which I know Rosalinda is going to be speaking on a panel for Washington Women's Foundation. They're convening on September 21st. We'll be at Town Hall, and there'll be a panel discussing healthcare. There'll be a panel discussing climate and agricultural justice, and there'll be a panel discussing education. And that is free and open to the public. You do need to register, but lunch will be provided. There'll be a reception afterwards, so that there are some of the people who are doing the work on the ground in these issues as well. So it's related to income inequality and the wage gap, how that plays into climate and agricultural justice. as well as healthcare and education. So just wanted to give it a shout out for those as well. There are other organizations like Front and Centered who are working on behalf or working along with farm workers and people in communities who are hardest hit by ecological, environmental change, because that's also unequal and how it impacts people, and that, again, the distribution of resources and who can afford what, or who can afford to send something elsewhere where they can't afford to say, no, we don't want your nuclear waste, no, we don't want your garbage, no, we don't want this. So those are all intertwined
Absolutely.
issues as
This
well.
is very systemic. I would also add, since you mentioned community and Rosalinda, they have been part of a global network called the Solidarity Economies Research Network. It is a network of people working on the ground to create a solidarity economy, which is my idea of a revolution, which isn't just, which is about actually securing resource control and creating cooperative solidarity interaction, because you can't just do it individually. So for example, if you produce in a co-op, you need to actually then source your inputs further down from another co-op, right? That is, you need to actually create an economic network and ecology that can thrive around it. They've been doing this work globally. Solidarity Economies Research Network, Solidarity Economies Network. They're very, very good. There is a US chapter. Rosalinda is part of it. I also recommend the work of Caroline Shanaz Hussain and Jessica Nemhart, both of who've been working on the Black social economy. Because, don't forget that when we talk about the neoliberal state or the non-state, Black community has been essentially excluded from state provision for so long, right? So we get nostalgic for a state that never really served them, which means that they have had, because they have very few other options, to really think through and work on questions of resource provisioning, social safety nets that are built out of the community. And there is actually a large history of that. So I would really recommend that work as well. And then locally, a shout out to Marilyn Watkins and the Economic Opportunity Institute. They have been doing really good work. And I had also mentioned Jennifer Ronish and the Western Poverty Center. Yeah.
And then also another local organization that's been working with farm workers in Eastern Washington, Wash Masks. It's a mutual aid society that I know a number of the artists in the audience are familiar with. It was initiated by Anna Marie Campoy, and initially it was about providing masks for the farm workers in COVID, because they were not being given any sort of COVID precautions, and they've expanded now and are addressing heat stress, exhaustion, and so in addition to educational and providing just some basic necessities for the families who help provide the food on our tables. So I encourage people to also check out washmasks.org to see how you can get involved with that and to learn more about what a mutual aid society is, what Charo had referenced in terms of Magnuson and Sandpoint, and so that it was a concept I was not really familiar with prior to the pandemic myself. So I imagine that there's probably a lot of other people who aren't familiar with the concept either, and that it is about people helping each other, and that it's not a state mandated resource allocation effort, but it is helping other people.
Yeah. And it's always got to be a both and. I do get very nervous when voluntarism becomes a model as a substitute for rights. So,
Right.
But that
Exactly.
said, it is, given that the state has failed us so badly, we need to do something.
So you mentioned the Economic Opportunity Institute, and what are some of the other organizations that are working to advocate with the state, to change policy, to address some of these things that,
Okay, so there is the Economic Policy Institute, the Western Policy Center. Mainly, especially in the United States, advocacy to the state takes the form of policy. That's what it means to advocate the state. It's either law and regulation, right, or it's policy. Those are the two. And when you're talking about laws and regulations, it could be that, court cases or things like that. But otherwise, what you're advocating for is budgets. You're advocating for the state to change, say, minimum wage policy, right? So a lot of that advocacy often goes through the political process. So the Economic Policy Institute is one. I know that Western Poverty Center is doing this. I know that, what is it called? Julia Swarovski's group, the Mental Health Workers Alliance or something in King County. They've been doing a tremendous amount of work on that. And there is, of course, community activists from BLM and elsewhere who've also been doing a lot of advocacy, not just to fight police brutality, but to really advocate for alternate ways of addressing social provisioning, healthcare support, and things like that.
right, because
yeah.
So talking about the split in a way between volunteerism over here
Yeah.
is not going to solve problems on its own, but the state has failed us over here, and so
There's-
that's why it has to be both
And it's got to be. So I like
so some of the
social justice fund is a really good model because what they do is they're not viewing voluntarism as a permanent solution, but they're viewing it as a mechanism for also engaging community knowledge and kind of like you have here with Contexpo, promoting knowledge, because the organization that you build around voluntarism becomes the kernel of what will subsequently become a political base. The political base does not emerge like Athena from Zeus's head fully formed. It's not like you show up once in a year for election and you're done. To have a proper political base, you actually need a network and a political movement that keeps showing up repeatedly. And that happens when you have this kind of ongoing activity, as opposed to just at election time. So that's why I do think it's a both and it's a very practical, not just a moral imperative. It's a very practical imperative. You cannot build a political base without having that community organizing element. So Social Justice Fund does a great amount of work there, but there is also stuff like resource generation, where this is people who are more wealthy, but they are more interested in using their own inherited assets, not as something that they will live off, but as a way to acquire, for example, land, so that farm workers around Bellingham or sort of hilltop urban gardens in Tacoma can acquire the land they need to actually do their own work and so on.
the Black Farmers Collective.
Yeah, that kind of stuff, yeah.
And to have more urban
Yeah.
food productivity
Yeah.
as well, to address some of the food deserts. But partly what I was thinking about was the idea that, okay, we're talking about income inequality and the wage gap and the wealth gap that goes along with that. And so the powerlessness that a lot of people feel because, the resources and the wealth and the power is all concentrated up here. And so if it's a matter of changing policy, well, what can we do? We can't really do anything about that. So we can help our neighbors, or volunteering, or yes, I do my civic duty, I vote once a year. But the idea that at the grassroots level, by getting involved in your community center boards, school boards, because that does help establish the budgets for where money is going to be focused. So whether it's funding or defunding the breakfast and lunch programs for school kids, that's one of the things. And so like even what we're seeing right now with the Seattle public school system and the teachers striking, and so for who controls the narrative, and which story are we hearing, and why, what the conflicts really are based in, and who supports the teachers or not, and what we're asking of our educators to do on, a piece of string and some chewing gum and a penny. And so not providing the resources that are needed, that those are ways
Absolutely.
that are more immediately accessible for people to get involved, to make a difference that leads to
And I
larger
will
change.
say that it really heartens me to see that and to see the union movement, to see the teachers strike, to see the union movement. This is interesting for me to say. Historically, the union movement used to be male, pale, and stale. As somebody, not my line, I stole it. As as there has been a clear acknowledgement of we are going to either fall together or we are going to stand together, and as there's been a clear understanding of the diversity of the working class, despite a tendency by many of my Marxist colleagues to still sort of argue that the main reason people voted for Trump was their working class, because, that's why no brown, black working class ever voted for Trump, working class or white, right? Let alone what the actual demographics of the vote shows. It was not really specific to less educated white working class. Quite a large percentage. It was much more racially than class diverse. It wasn't. Yeah. So, but the new union movements are both organizing more militantly. They're reaching into areas of the economy that in the past were not quite as unionized. And there is a lot more attention. So I will give you one example. I did not know. Before I came here, I taught at UNLV. I taught at University of Hawaii, and then I taught at UNLV. And, everybody talks about Nevada, Las Vegas. One thing I did not know until I went there is Las Vegas is the single most unionized city in the United States as percentage of labor force. Because you might only see the rich and elite casinos. For every hotel room there are fleets of waiters, of food providers, of cooks, of people who are washing the rooms, and all of those are workers of colors, and they're all unionized. They are all members of the Hotel Restaurant Workers Association. That is why Vegas still remained one of those places where those casino jobs, you could be an immigrant, you could get one of those jobs, and you could put your children through college. One of the very few, you don't think of Vegas in that way, but one of the very few places you could do that. That's also what took Nevada for Obama. It was those people. So, just don't underestimate what can happen when you really mobilize in that fashion. I never thought I would see, I was in Vegas, I never thought I would go to Obama. I mean, that place is Sheldon Adelman and all those sort of rich, casino quarters. But yep.
Okay, well, so we'll take another break, and we'll do the second teaser scene, which is from The Epic Differential by Mary. I almost said Mary E. It's Mary A. It's Mary E. Okay, before I kept calling her Mary Fields, who was somebody else entirely. And I've known Mary for years, and Mary's husband, so I apologize. Mary E. Brown. Not Mary A. Brown, that's somebody else as well. But so we'll do another teaser scene if you want to refill your plates and your beverages really quickly, and then we will wrap up. Yes.
A moment that
I want that.
we haven't rehearsed.
I'm always down for a moment.
So we'll wait a few moments.
Give me the go.
Right, since That was my bad for saying, let's take a break and do the scene, but it's a good time for people to be using the restroom, and then we'll wait until people get back, and then we will do the scene. So talk amongst yourselves.
I'm gonna go to that. Epic Differential by Mary E. Brown. We see Ed slowly making his way across the rooftop, scouting a chair just so, easing, then awkwardly plopping into the chair with a groan. He fishes out both a cigarette and a weed pipe, looks around a little guiltily, then slowly considers which he wants to smoke first. Eventually, he chooses the weed.
Nice evening. Quiet, all alone. Just what I wanted. The hell are you doing here?
Same as you know, minding my own business.
Who are you? I said, who are you?
Yes, I heard you say that.
Well,
I'm not obligated to answer you, you know? Or do you assume that because you're an old white guy that I am?
well, no,
It's okay. I'm obviously nobody.
Are you a resident? I've never seen you before, have I?
Doubtful. In fact, you probably don't see me now.
What the fuck is that supposed to mean?
Guys like you don't see people like me.
I'm looking right at you, pal. I can see you just fine. get up here?
I took the stairs.
I mean, how did you get in the building?
What is your problem, old man? I'm not bothering you, so do me a solid and back the fuck off.
I asked if you were a resident. You don't look like a senior.
Sure, then I must be a resident.
Are you? You sure as hell don't look like a senior.
So you're just going to make assumptions because of what you think I look like? Oh, it's fucking
Well, maybe I should call someone.
Yeah, maybe you should. You're obviously lonely for company.
I meant like the police.
That's your security go-to? Wow. Good luck, Karen.
Ed returns to his pipe and makes several attempts to light it. He is unsuccessful. Without turning around, Nem withdraws the lighter and makes a point of casually lighting it and letting it burn for a few moments, and repeats. Ed watches, finally clearing his throat.
Hey. Hey, person?
You talking to me, Karen?
I am not a Karen.
Don't I get to make assumptions, though? Because of what I think you look like? Let's see. White. Check. Middle-aged. At least. Check. Judgmental and entitled. Check and check.
Fuck you. You don't know me.
True. But, here you are. Immediately assume we didn't have anything in common.
Touche.
Nem points back towards the sunset. Ed fiddles with his lighter to no avail.
Hey, can I borrow your lighter for a second?
Ed uses it and passes it back.
Thank you. I guess this will help me chill the fuck out a little bit, huh? I don't mean to be an asshole, but
Yeah, you ever notice how whenever somebody says they don't mean to be a whatever, followed by a but, they invariably prove to themselves to be exactly whatever they claim not to be?
I was just gonna say, we've got a lot of homelessness, drug use, crime around here, and you know, it's supposed to be safe. It's not. Gotta watch out for trouble.
We don't take too kindly to strangers in these parts. Yo, so you got a community here? Know each other? Look out for each other?
Yeah, a little. A little more than some places, I guess. I mean, this is my first senior apartment. I'm only 61, which just means I barely qualify to live here, but boy, was I glad to find some place that I was just old enough and just broke enough to manage. At least while I'm still able to work.
Getting ready to retire?
Retire? You mean like with a pension or a hefty IRA? Dude, I don't have any delusions of that being a reality. Pretty much the best I can hope for is that maybe, just maybe, I can continue writing or acting enough to supplement my minuscule Social Security if, and it's a big if, the entire program isn't scrapped in the next 5 or 6 years.
Ed pauses, then through motion, requests and borrows Nem's lighter and hits the pipe. This time, instead of hitting it, Ed offers the pipe to Nem. Nem takes a reasonable hit and passes it back to Ed.
So yeah, my retirement is riding on affording this place until I die. Hopefully that'll be something quick, because I definitely can't afford any lingering illnesses.
I hear that. Huh. Hell, I can't even afford a cough drop.
Oh, well, hey. There you go, pal.
Now I am thoroughly prepared to indulge in almost 7.5 minutes of minimal respiratory symptom suppression.
Did you hear? Symptom suppression is the new actually healthy. And that's a top-end cough drop, I'm told. Mentholated and stevia sweetened with organic eucalyptus.
Even better. Now I can help a single wheezing koala fleeing their fire-ravaged home.
And the wrapper is biodegradable or some shit like that, too. Coming off a bout with COVID, I had an about to pee myself coughing jag, and the only place to find cough drops was a frickin' Whole Foods. It's probably a $10 cough drop.
$1 million view, a decent apartment, and $10 cough drops. Sounds pretty prosperous to me.
Prosperous? You are it, at least in name.
Hey, Joy. Yeah, I mean, isn't it like prosperous with friends? Or some crappy qualifier like that? Seeing as how I never got around to introducing myself, I'm Ed.
So, not Karen?
Hi, I'm Joy. According to Ed here, one of the few names he's never forgotten.
Yeah, I've known you for what, like 2 months, and I see you up here 2-3 times a week. You're kind of hitting the sweet spot for keeping it fresh, and I'm a little young yet for having senior moments.
You look familiar. Do you live in the building?
Not exactly. Do you?
Who, me? No! I come and visit my Aunt Linda every Tuesday and Saturday. I mean, Nakia, that's my partner. She always works the second shift, so I have time, whatever. Help her clean up and the place, make dinner, play a hand or two of chin rummy. By her, I mean Aunt Linda, not Nakia, of course. Certainly, Nakia never needs me to clean up after her. It's definitely the other way around. She's definitely the tiger of the two of us. Oh, but Aunt Linda is just kind of lonely, but she's quite sweet and really the only family I have left. I mean, yet. I mean, like blood family, but don't need to tell my life story, right? Well, I was just going to say, when I came out, it seemed the two of you knew each other. So what's your name?
Nem.
Nem. N-E-M. That's little out of the ordinary, that name, right? I mean, I definitely don't know that one, and I know a lot of names, but it's always great to learn a new one, so Nem. Is that your whole name or nickname? Is it a shortened version of a name, maybe?
Yeah, I guess it was like Namina originally.
Oh, that's nice. I think Namina sounds much more friendly than Nem. Nem sounds kind of, don't know, grumpy. Like Knight. Not that I've ever met someone named Knight. That'd be kind of silly. But I mean, you'd probably have to be Russian. Anyway, well, you don't really look Russian, but what do I know? It's a nice name. Where does it come from?
My memory.
Like, I mean, where do your family come from?
I don't have a family.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I mean your people, but I'm sorry about your family. I mean, I bet they were sweet people and you were good to your mama. I can just tell that about people, like I just feel it in my heart. Of course, I don't know the first thing about you, your story or anything, and I don't mean to be nosy.
Hey, that reminds me of a recent observation that someone...
Oh, anyway, Nem, it is, right? You're saying you prefer Nem to Namina, right? Anyway, I don't mean to be nosy or anything like that. We don't even have to say anything further. It's just, I'm not familiar with it. And, well, at the moment, I'm collecting names.
Oh, right. Now, Joy is collecting names for the baby. Anyway, Joy, in respect for your state, I'm going to move downwind,
I appreciate it, but you're not doing yourself any favors either, Ed. I don't mean to nag, of course, but a guy your age, quitting smoking is the best thing you can do for
Joy, not now, okay? I'm an old dog, and you know what they say.
No, Ed, I'm sorry. You go ahead. I'll move way over there. Sit, you stay. It's your roof. Well, I mean, you're the resident, right? I mean, both know you're not supposed to be smoking up here anyway, but
Joy trails off and fiddles with her phone.
Jesus Christ, she's sweet, I guess, but she never stops talking. Never. Thank God, I cut her off before we got more details on frickin' baby fucking names. Care for smoke?
Thank you, but I don't smoke anymore. Quit a while back.
Yeah, good for you.
Miss it sometimes.
Eh, too much shit we already miss in life. That's my excuse. Tonight.
Wow, I had to. Or kiss my job goodbye.
Oh boy, I get that. I just smoke at home, anyway.
Well, no, I couldn't even smoke. In my personal life, I had to be prepared to reflect an appropriate company image at all times.
Oh, to hell with that. Now, if I choose to smoke in my personal life, some HR department isn't going to dictate what I can and cannot do in my own private world. Fuck that.
Yeah, well, I don't got enough game myself, so back then, I tried playing someone else's.
And now? I guess I've just never had to deal with that. It's always seemed like, well, you know, whatever I do in my own home or to or with my own body in my own time is my own business.
Well, you're part of a vanishing breed. Sorry to say, but probably doomed to the next to the lowest income level. You're technically poor, but kid yourself into thinking you're grasping the tattered remains of the middle class, right? Because you were raised in a state of relative privilege and affluence, always something to eat, always a roof over your
But,
head.
hey, now, Dad, sometimes work two jobs. I know we live paycheck to paycheck. We did our share of scraping.
Oh, poor you. Were you ever truly homeless or hungry?
No. Hey, what were we talking about again? Not sure why I'm feeling guilty for never being homeless.
Sorry, I guess what I'm saying is the more you expect to mind your own business, the less money you're going to make, period. You already said yourself, you're never going to retire. You've got no nest egg. Right now, you're holding tight, and I mean real tight. So what privileges you still have? Being able to pay rent, keep your job, and still smoke if you want to, that is a privilege. Shit, just having a safe place to sleep a couple hours a night is a privilege.
well, it's late.
Actually, Joy, no thanks to me. I think Ed could use your namesake energy at the moment. Please, here, take my chair.
No, don't you dare.
Well, here I am, but no. At the moment, I prefer to stand, but thank you.
But I was just leaving.
No, but no, Nem, let's hear about Joy's baby names. Did you find any good ones yet? Did you look up Nem's name? Is it a contender?
A contender.
You know, good name for the wee bairn. Nem, Sid, you need some of Joy's namesake energies too, I can tell. I insist. So did you look up Nem's?
No.
Wow. I just met you and I already know you're lying. It's okay, Joy. I already know what it means.
Well, what does it mean?
Well, it means nobody.
End of scene.
Sharon, if you'd like to do that for our last little bit.
So we'd like to thank Hazel Rose Gibson, Anabuti Sood, and Andrew Litsky for their performances in that scene from An Epic Differential by Mary E. Brown. Again, the performances for Expand Upon are coming in October, and there'll be more information about that on our website at mirrorstage.org. I'm wondering if either of the scenes raised any questions for anybody related to the topic, or if you're wondering how the plays were related to the topic, or if it made you think at all. So if there are any other questions that people would like us to address? Okay, everything is clear to everyone. We all understand. Well, I'm glad that we were able to solve the issues of income inequality.
I've
and
been
wage
very well behaved so far. Do I get to ask?
Yes,
Thanks.
absolutely.
So I actually would like to hear from, first a comment and then to hear from the playwrights. The comment is, and this is a conversation we were having about the incredible importance of Contexpo and of this kind of event and plays. And it's in the context of stuff that people don't actually know about my profession. As I said, I'm an economist. There's a few things you need to know about economics as a profession. Until the 60s and 70s, economics in most of the world, including the US, was a handmaiden of policy. We were a social science. Our job was to study the economy. With the rise of business schools, economics shifted location. They get paid more, so econ departments actually started shifting out of social science and into business. And econ departments that stayed in social sciences have tended to be more policy-oriented. My economics department, UMass Amherst, is very well known for a particular kind of historical traverse, and in that context. But once you're in a business school, your role is no longer to study the economy. Your role is to train people to advocate for business, because that's what you're doing, right? You're training people in a professional degree to become people who work for businesses, which is different than training people to study how business works. So just think about the difference between an entire field, which is to advocate, but people still think it is studying, right? And that's a confusion about what exactly is taught in this part of the world as economics. It's the neoclassical revolution, marginalism. It's definitely not the way it's taught in most parts of the world. And, you know, historically in the US, you used to have institutionalist economics. You still have post-Keynesians, you have a whole bunch of folks, and you didn't really have the monetarists and the marginalists be so big. It's also the only profession that does not have a code of conduct of ethics at all. And in fact, there is a debate about whether we should have one, and there's been an effort to nix it. So, for example, only the European journals require a revelation of your funding source, whereas the American journals do not for economics. It's also, when it comes to high school curriculum, it is set by the Better Business Bureau. It is not actually set by the American Economics Association. So this gives you a real sense of what's been taught as economics to generations of people. And in that context, plays like this are hugely important, because if the educational institution has been captured, then it really is the community bases for really addressing issues, right, and raising them that becomes central way. And so that's the context in which I really want to ask the playwrights, which is there's a real difference in what you do when you're writing a play. You can't do what I do, which is I assume I have a captive audience for 10 weeks, and I'm going to grade them at the end of it, and therefore they have to sit and listen to me, right? and I can take exams and so on. And so there is this very interesting question I have for those of you who write plays and those of you who act them. There is a sort of question of the research that goes into doing the writing, which is really large, and then the sort of storytelling that goes into it. And I just really love to hear a little bit about how you navigate those two.
Well, so Mary, if you would like to come up here, because I know this mic won't reach all the way, but as you. Oh no, I'm an actor and a teacher. I know, but because we're live streaming, we. Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. So for the folks at home.
I can't hide behind the table here, sort of sheltering myself. So I wasn't. I don't know that I was prepared to be either an actor or a teacher today, but yeah, come here as a playwright. So, well, one of the things generally when you're writing plays, especially something like this, where you do want to get some factual information, is that you have a dramaturg, which Kiki has also been for us. So I started off early in this process by, asking her to dig up some statistical things. You guys didn't necessarily see an example of that in the teaser scene where that comes in there. So, in this scene, it's early on, and I'm just sort of touching on the fact that, where the money is actually controls what information we have, and basically how we're told to behave. So it gets a little bit more specific. So, but so I asked Kiki to dig up some statistics on particular information. One of the things that I'm really dealing with in my story is the wealth gap more than the income gap. The fact that there are a disgusting number of billionaires. And I don't know if you guys have also seen this, but they say by 2026 that they suspect that Jeff Bezos will be the world's first trillionaire. So when you have such a very, very small percentage of the population of the planet Earth holding such a large percentage of the wealth, I think that that's the root of the problem. So, I don't want to get on my soapbox or anything here. I mean, I've already done that, I guess, on my thing. But is that sort of answering what you're asking? What was the other part of the question?
Well, so the storytelling.
Oh, the storytelling. Well, so bringing into it my own, personal experience also as a, speaking to your, about the inherited wealth, that's kind of not happening. And I really believe that in a lot of ways that the middle class is disappearing. And I was raised as the character, Ed, in a state of relative affluence. My parents were definitely part of the middle class. But with mom's illness and early demise and the burial costs and then the cost of health care and everything else, even though my dad was really set up for, a nice pension and everything else, he's using that to survive right now. I'm not going to get any inherited wealth, and working jobs, for smaller companies or theaters or things like that. I don't necessarily have, health insurance and stuff like that. So a lot of what Ed is saying there in that scene is my own, personal type of thing. But so I also live actually in an affordable senior apartment that has epic views upstairs. So that is that one is definitely not fictional, but because of the way that it is, it's like your income has to fall within a certain measure, right? It's not subsidized, but you can't make more than a certain amount. So since both my husband and I are what do they say, teaching artists? So we're both teaching artists. And fortunately, we can both afford to not have to work, 40-hour work weeks and stuff to be able to live in this place. In fact, if I actually worked as much or got paid what I was actually worth, then I would be booted out of there, right? So it's a little bit of a catch-22, right? So just have to be just old enough and just poor enough, broke enough to be able to live in there. So But yeah, with the storytelling aspect, I like to make the dialogue sound real. And if you were to see my script, I was talking yesterday with Kiki about this, that I put in a lot of sort of stage directions, when there's like ellipses and, people, because that's how people talk, right? They don't talk in a straight line, right? People talk like this. So, which is what I'm doing. So, yeah, so getting the information from there, bringing in my own personal experience, and taking my beliefs in a lot of ways, that redistribution of the insane 0.01% quantity of wealth is maybe a good first step if one could figure out a way to do that. So, which I sort of did in my play, but I'm not going to tell you guys anymore because I'll leave it for a surprise. So there we go.
Before you go, do you want to say anything about how the specific process for Expand Upon is a little different than traditional playwriting, because we assign a theme that we ask you to respond to, and we say, this is the cast that you're going to be writing for. So how that may have impacted your process.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, well, what she said. No, it was great because, you give somebody too much space in a room, they don't know where to stand, right? So I was really glad to be like, oh, yes, a theme, that's great. And this is something that I can associate with as, not an affluent person. But also wanting to recognize the fact that I am still, come from a middle-class background, and I'm a white woman, and some people might look at me and think of me as a Karen and what have you. But I loved when, yes, I got very short descriptors on the actors, and, it was kind of funny because, one of them was like, there were some like non-binary, or they present this way, or one said that they were like tall, so like 4 words, and apparently the actors chose which, 4 words or whatever that they were going to use to describe themselves. And that was great. It gave me, I immediately looked at it and thought, I want to use all 7 of them. But because I already sort of had an idea of the story that I wanted to write, and it certainly seemed like these descriptors as I knew them was weird. So it was sort of weird because I do have to say that I was a little bit confused by this process. Like, okay, so here's your, and it's just like actor number 1, and actor number 2, right? So I never actually got to see the performers or hear their voices at all, which is, so I was really curious. I'm like, so am I writing this to the particular character? Right, so this line would be spoken by actor number 1, in which case it's asking me to cast this play as well, but it's sort of asking that in the first place. So that was a very unique angle to come at it, I think, as a playwright, to be like, nope, these are your actors, and you pick which ones you want, but you don't necessarily pick which roles they're in. I'm like, okay, well, all right, well. But I think even just from my instincts in the original descriptions, it seems like Kiki actually pretty much cast them the way that I was visualizing them in my head. So, yeah, I loved doing this topic. My husband had done a reading for a play by Celeste, which I still love to this day, on immigration, right? The Beavers one. Oh, it was wonderful. I keep wanting to do that with my students. But yeah, so I don't know. Maybe Celeste wants to talk about this since she's done it before.
Well, because unfortunately, Nell Tankus, our other playwright, couldn't be with us here today, but it is 2 o'clock, so Celeste is kind of off the hook for this time. It's because we do need to wrap up in terms of the live stream. But as we're cleaning up, if you want to ask Celeste questions, feel free to do that. And if you're watching at home and you have questions for Celeste, you can comment on the YouTube channel, and we'll make sure that we get those questions asked and answered. So in wrapping up, I want to thank Charu for joining us and providing such an illuminating look into income inequality and the wage gap and the so many different things that are a part of that and behind it and inside of it and around it and above and below it and that comprise because again we still were just scratching the surface. This was not it's not a topic that we can wrap up in 90 minutes and then we've solved it. So thank you, Charu. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to the actors and the playwrights. And again, we will be presenting Expand Upon Income Inequality and the Wage Gap 2 weekends in October. And I would say the exact dates, but I don't want to say the wrong dates. So I will say check our website at mirrorstage.org. And at this point, it is looking like both weekends will be online. So we hope to see you there and at future Contexpos and Activism Brunches. Thank you so much.
Thanks. And if we are offline, then if I might make a personal shill, University of Washington Bothell School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences, as well as a couple of other units, we are got a speakers series coming up for the coming year. We had one last year. We're going to have another one this coming year, supported by the Harry Bridges Labor Center. And it's going to be on questions of labor, prison reform, labor activism, and among other things, culminate with my colleague there, Chingy Chen, who is who is a poet, speculative fiction writer, and it will actually culminate with their writing course on speculative fiction and futures, alternate futures that we want to create. My shill is in there. Winter quarter, the winter quarter sequence will include my course on gender and the politics of economy, and there's going to be people from across the globe who will be giving lectures. Watch for it. I'll make sure Suzanne has the details.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we'll definitely be sharing information about that in our e-newsletter. So please sign up if you are not already signed up for our e-news. So again, thank you. And if we haven't stopped the stream, then Michael, we can stop now.